Your quoting process is costing you way more than you realize. Lost deals, wasted engineering time, frustrated customers, and a burned out sales team. This is why your factory is not full, and this is why you're not profitable. In this video, I'm going to give you the complete roadmap for fixing your quoting process. It's 12 steps from start to finish, and whether you're quoting custom equipment, configured machinery, or other made-to-order products, this is the complete roadmap that you need. So what are we going to cover in this video? We're going to talk about why you should improve your quoting process at all, and why should this be the top priority for you in your manufacturing company. What does a good quoting process look like? What are the downstream benefits outside of just increasing revenue that you see when you improve your quoting? And what are the 12 steps from start to finish? Quick background on me before we get started. In case you don't know, my name is Byrne. I'm a mechanical and manufacturing engineer. I've been implementing AI and automation solutions since my time at Intel, and I've been on projects that have delivered over $100 million in documented savings. Now I work with mid-market manufacturers to implement those same approaches so that they can benefit from technologies like AI and automation. So part one, why should you even look at improving your quoting process? And why should this be your top priority even when you have so many other things you could focus on? The first thing is that increasing revenue matters way more than most people realize. A lot of focus in lean manufacturing is about improving profitability, but we'll look at something just now that will show you why it is that increasing revenue makes such a big difference. Probably you're aware that your cost structure has two different parts. You've got your fixed costs and your variable costs. Your fixed costs don't change every time you add volume, but your variable costs do. So variable costs like your material costs, your direct labor, if there are people that are on hourly contracts, whenever you have to pay for things like overtime and so on, these things will continue to fluctuate as you add more orders. On the fixed cost side, your mortgage, your rent, and your utilities, these sorts of things will stay similar or at least pretty close to flat, even as your volume increases. And why does that matter? So after a certain point, which we would call the break-even point, there will be a point where your fixed costs have already been covered by your sales. That means that after that point, every additional sale will be more profitable. And the key insight here is that these incremental sales only have to cover your variable costs, so the profit margin on those sales will be higher. Quick example of that for a typical order, let's say while you haven't covered your fixed costs yet, you'll be somewhere in the range of a 50% variable cost, just an example, and something in the range of, I think that's about 30% on your fixed cost allocation. So this piece of equipment that you sell, for example, for $50,000, you might have a 20% margin when you're paying for your variable and your fixed costs. On an incremental order above that break-even point, let's say your sale price is still $50,000, your variable costs are still $25K, but you have no fixed cost allocation, so your profit margin may be as high as 50%. This will obviously depend on your gross margin and things like that in general. But how does that look on a chart here? So if you had a look at this over here, your loss zone would be below this break-even point. For this company, their break-even point is somewhere around 60 units of that piece of equipment. And as they go above that point of 60, you'll see that they start getting into a profit state, with that profit increasing linearly at a pretty high rate because their fixed costs have already been accounted for. And this is why it's so important for manufacturers to try to utilize their entire capacity in their factory. So what are the implications of this? Well, it means that the best way for your company to become more profitable, as long as you have existing capacity in your factory that you're not using, is just to sell more. Let's just do some numbers real quick. I just want to give you an example of this. And again, it is just an example, not necessarily true for all companies here, but let's say a company is doing about $50 million in revenue with a current win rate of about 15%. If that company is doing about 100 quotes per month, they have a gross margin of, let's say, 35%. And that means that their current deal size is somewhere in the region of 275K with about 180 deals won per year. For that company, let's say that their win rate was to increase by a relative amount of 20%, which is something like a 3% increase in this scenario. That would be a pretty conservative estimate of what you would expect in a scenario where you improve your performance on your quoting. That could be as high as a 50% relative increase, or if you have really low win rates in general, you could be seeing a double in the terms of your win rate. If your win rate is something like 5%, you could even see a doubling in your win rate by improving your quoting process. For this company here, you'll also see that there'll be a slight bump in terms of the volume of quotes that they give out. Generally, what happens here is that as you become better at quoting, more suppliers, more reps will continue to come back to your company because they know that they can get a quote easily and they know they can get a quote fast. So 10 to 20% increase in the quote volume as well as an increase in the win rate. You'll see that it's something between 32 and 80% revenue growth. And of course, this does kind of assume that you'll have the ability to service this additional capacity. Most manufacturers I speak to say that they're kind of in the 70 to 80% utilization of their factory. So you may not be able to reach these sort of numbers, but it is something to keep in mind that just these small increases in win rate and quote volume can have a huge impact on the revenue for your business. Another thing to remember here as well is that if you do start to get up towards that maximum capacity and you're getting higher profit margins because of what we just talked about, you will have a huge increase in the overall value of your company in terms of enterprise value. Companies with smaller amounts of profit get a lower multiple in terms of their enterprise value to EBITDA multiple. You'd be talking somewhere in the like 3 to 5 times EBITDA range when you're down in the 1 to 2 million range. If you can get your profit up to something like 5 million, you might be talking more in the range of like 7 to 10 times EBITDA. Maybe a little bit less, maybe a little bit more. It depends on what it is that you sell. It depends on your recurring revenue and stuff like that too. But it is something to keep in mind, especially if you're looking at selling your company in the future. So how do we actually win more quotes? What is the process to reduce this leaky bucket that is currently your quoting process? Well, what does your quoting process currently look like? Well, there is some amount of inquiries in terms of people that are reaching out to you via your website or maybe through your email accounts. You're getting some leads that are being lost that never actually turn into quotes because the person only gives you a small amount of information and maybe you come back and you're asking them for more information and so on. Maybe the process is a little bit too hard for the person. They don't want to go and request a quote from 10 different vendors and you were a little slow to get back to them. This also reduces, any quotes that are becoming quotes you may lose because you take too long to respond. And typically for manufacturers, they might be in somewhere in the region of like a 15 to 20% win rate on their quotes. But what is it that actually drives improvement to this? The one thing is speed. Speed matters more than anything else when it comes to your quoting process because your customer could be requesting quotes from many different companies at the same time. This is just a quick look at the decay of the win rate. So how many of your quotes are going to win when you're looking at same-day quotes, 24-hour quotes, and so on. As you'll see, same-day quotes are much more likely to win than a quote that takes 48 hours or a quote that takes up to 2 weeks. And this will again depend on what it is that you sell. If you sell highly custom equipment, yes, generally it's going to be hard to get your quoting process down to same day or 24 hours. But remember who you're competing with. Have a look at what the competitors in your market are able to do. If there are other people offering same-day quotes, you have to be offering the same. And this is because your customer isn't just waiting for you. If they send a request for quote, they're generally sending it to 3 or 4 companies. And generally the first company to send that quote has a massive advantage. Why would that be? Well, you're just signaling to the end customer that you're much more competent than your competitors, that you're organized, that you're easy to work with, and that you want their business. They're going to assume that if you got back to them right away, that it's because you have capacity, you have the ability to service that right away, and you must have good systems in place, you must have good processes in place if you're able to provide a quote within hours or minutes. So what does a typical sales or quoting process look like in manufacturing companies? Well, generally there is a contact us form somewhere on the website where you can input your name and your email and your company name and maybe something like a drawing or a 3D part or a text box where you can enter some information. But most likely your customer won't give you all the information that's needed for a quote. Then you'll go back and forth between sales and engineering and trying to get a call booked in with that customer to find out more information about what it is that they need. Maybe you end up getting that discovery call, maybe you don't, but for the majority of these situations, This back and forth between sales and engineering and other departments tends to slow down the process, and eventually you'll have a quote sent between somewhere in 7 to 14 days. So at this point, we've covered why you should even bother trying to improve your quoting process, and now we'll look at what does a good quoting process look like. Well, there are two groups that are interacting with your quoting process. There are your customers, and then there's your team that is actually creating the quotes. On the customer side, you want it to be easy for them to request a quote. You want to have fast responses when they've requested a quote so you can reach out and maybe ask for information that they haven't given you. You want to have a short turnaround time from inquiry to quote being sent to the customer. You want to be able to provide accurate lead times to your customer, and you want to have a rush option available. This is where you can potentially charge 15 to 20% extra to get an order delivered in 4 weeks rather than 8 weeks. On the operations side, so on the internal side, what do you want this to look like? Well, you want to be able to give a consistent output no matter who it is that touches the quote. You want to be able to scale the volume of the quote that you can send without having a similar multiplication in the amount of people doing the quote. So you want to be able to do twice as many quotes with the same amount of people. You want to be able to track the quotes all the way from the inquiry point through to the delivery of that quote. And eventually you might want to be able to show your customer where in the process their quote is. And finally, you want to be able to protect your margins and make sure that your margins are being tracked on every single quote that is sent. If you can get this right, you will win more deals, you'll have higher profits, and you will have less stress, and you'll also have a more scalable company. So what are the downstream benefits that exist when you improve your quoting process? There are lots of things that get fixed outside of just your quoting when you improve your quoting process. The first one of those is your product mix. So you'll be able to sell more standard rather than a lot of custom work. And custom work is great, especially if you can use it for research and development and you can start to improve your product and offer more things to your customers. But it is likely that the more custom work you do, the more involvement engineering has to have, and the more you'll begin to have a bottleneck in engineering. You want to be making sure that all of your orders are buildable. We've worked with lots of manufacturers where the ordering process and the quoting process has the possibilities of unbuildable configurations getting through into engineering or even potentially getting into manufacturing. That will slow your team down. That'll also create problems with your customers. But with an improved quoting system, you can reduce this significantly. On the pricing side, we already mentioned protecting your company's margins. It is likely that you'll be able to do this pretty well by having all of your pricing rules built into your configurator tool. Again, as I said, the engineering capacity here is huge. A lot of manufacturers have a bottleneck in their engineering department, which means that their engineers are focusing a lot more on this day-to-day putting out fires and on the quoting and things like that. Engineers are often really expensive as well, and it's not easy to find high-quality engineers in. So reducing this bottleneck in engineering is huge, and it will improve your overall ability to get product through your factory. You often have situations where the production data or the information that your production team gets on sales and on projects or products that get into the factory are not fully complete. But if you improve your quoting process, you can make sure that you're capturing all that data and feed it straight to your manufacturing team. You'll also get this retention of knowledge because you're able to capture more different types of information within your quoting system. There's lots of manufacturers that have very experienced sales teams where someone's been working there for 30 years and they know all of these possible configurations, but all of that lives in that person's head. If you put all of this into a system and you continually improve it over time, you'll be able to capture that knowledge and keep it even when these people retire. You'll also have a faster onboarding of any new employees because the new employees are able to learn from how the system operates. The system guides them in terms of how they should sell, which means you don't have as many new people coming on and not being able to sell for the first year, which does mean that you can continue to grow your sales team. Let's say by some chance you can double your revenue and you want to continue to grow and you want to build out new factories, then you might need to hire more salespeople, and being able to onboard them faster will make a big difference here. You'll also be able to capacity plan, so you'll be able to look at how much capacity do we have in the factory, because you'll understand what sort of pipeline you've got in your sales process. You'll start to be able to understand more your win rates and your predictability of win rates, so you can start to schedule all these things in advance and offer more accurate lead times to your customers. And finally then, data accuracy and less errors. You'll have way less errors in terms of data entry errors. We often see this when people have to enter the same information into multiple different systems, where the information in two different systems doesn't actually align, and then it's really hard to know which is the correct. This is not just a quoting project, it's an overall operations transformation. What you'll see is that as you can increase your win rates and improve your quoting process, the amount of opportunities that will line up, that you can start to increase your capacity in your factory even more, because you're able to unlock these efficiencies that you wouldn't have known existed. And finally, the 12 steps, so your complete implementation roadmap from start to finish on how you can improve your quoting process. Step one will be to understand what it is that you're building. There are two different types of systems. There is an RFQ system, which is a request for quote system, which is generally how your customer requests a quote, let's say on your website or even through email. You'll also have a configure price quote system, a CPQ, which is how you build your quotes internally. This is almost like a quote factory where your team has the access to a tool. And oftentimes right now you might be using an Excel sheet, or you might be using a configurator within your ERP, or maybe you're using a combination of both. But understanding the difference between these two systems will be really important, and we'll be covering that in much more detail in a future video. Step two will be to define your products and configuration space. So what are the things that you can actually sell? Like, what is it that your team sells? What are your products? What are your product families? What items and what options can be configured on those pieces of equipment or machinery? And finally, what are the rules for valid combinations? Like, let's say I've chosen option A, so I must now take option B, or because I've chosen option A, I cannot have option C. A lot of manufacturers don't have this documented. Sometimes it lives in people's heads. Sometimes some of it's documented, sometimes none of it's documented. But being able to put all of these rules in place will ensure that you can have accurate rules and accurate configurations, so you're always selling buildable machinery and equipment. Something to add here as well is that if you can define your standard products and your configurations, you can, as we said earlier, try to sell more standard equipment. But when you do sell something that's custom, you can then add that in as a future option for standard equipment, meaning that your customers are financing your research and development. Step three will be to map the information requirements that you need to gather from your customer. So what do you absolutely need to know before you can send a quote to your customer? What are the things that you need to collect in your RFQ system? What are the must-haves versus nice-to-haves? So what are the things that you can get away with not getting, and what are the things that you absolutely need? What are the technical requirements that the customer is trying to achieve with the piece of equipment or machinery that they're buying from you? And what are the commercial requirements? So what is the use case that they're using this for? So if you can get this right, you can reduce that back and forth between you and the customer and improve the speed at which you can give your quote. And this is not about trying to stop any communication between your team and your customer. This is trying to reduce that back and forth communication so that you only have to ask your customer questions once. Step four then will be to structure your pricing. Oftentimes pricing is quite difficult when it comes to manufacturing components of machinery and equipment. You'll have to have your cost rules, your margin rules, as well as discount frameworks in the case that you sell through either a rep network or you go direct to customers. And what you're trying to build out here is a rules-based system so that you're not just calculating based on somebody's gut feel on what something should cost. Step five then will be to design your sales process and your workflow. Who in the sales process has which job? What are the approval thresholds that people have to look at? How do handoffs work between different areas of the company? And what happens when there's an exception or when a customer is looking for something that's custom? If you have this process really well defined, it becomes much easier to automate some of the parts, especially the more repeatable parts and the parts that are not necessarily the communication back and forth with the customer. So when does your engineering team have to get involved? A lot of times with equipment and machinery manufacturers, engineering involvement is the number one bottleneck that slows things down in the sales process, but also that limits the capacity in the manufacturing plant. So when exactly does engineering have to get involved in a sale? What can the system handle, and when can the system handle some of these custom configurations? And how do we capture the engineering work so that we can reuse that and not have to get the engineering team to redo things again and again over time? Step 7 will be your lead time logic. So you don't want your customers to just be getting a price when they get a quote from you. They also want to know when they're going to get that product. So what are the things that drive lead time for your products? Is it the equipment on site? Do you have a scheduling tool? Do you have visibility into your pipeline? And do you have visibility into your inventory? How are you going to calculate that lead time? And how are you going to handle rush requests to try to fit those in, especially if you're going to be increasing your revenue and increasing your output over time? Step 8 then will be to start building your RFQ system. So now that we know what information we need from the customer, we can start to create forms that the customer can interact with. You want to have a routing logic built into this where it's going to the right person for the right type of quote. And you'll also want to have a tracking dashboard where you can see all of your quotes in one place. This is the front door for your customers. You need to make this as easy as possible. And you also need to have staged forms where you're not collecting all the information at once, because you might put the customer off if you throw a 40-question form right at them. You want to break that up into stages so that even if the customer only fills in the first couple stages, you've got some of the information that you need. And this is like what we're talking about earlier. When you've got your must-have information, you want to put that right at the front. And then you can have your nice-to-haves later on in the form. After you've built out your RFQ system, you'll want to start building your CPQ system, so your configure price quote system, which will need to have a configuration engine, it'll need to have a pricing engine, and it'll also need to have a quote generator. So it's going to be like an output document that can go straight to your customer. And you'll probably have an internal quote and an external quote, with the external quote maybe having a little bit less information, but having a nicer format. Step 10 will be designing what that quote format looks like when it goes to your customer. What sort of information are you going to be presenting to the customer in terms of your pricing and your options? What are the terms and conditions that are going to be stored in that quote? And how is that quote going to appear to your customer? Do you want to have some drawings in there? Do you want to have an estimation of your lead time, and so on? And you would be surprised with how much the presentation and the terms in the quote will increase the win rate for your quotes. One of the most important things with your quoting strategy and your sales strategy overall will be the integrations to your internal systems. You'll need to be able to integrate to your ERP system so you can pull out inventory, you can pull out things like your capacity, and input things like your orders and your new quotes that have been sent. You may need to have an integration to a CRM if you do have a CRM. This will be things like pulling in the customer information and pulling in any existing capacity or any existing opportunities. And you'll also want to be putting information into those systems as well. And finally, if you do want to integrate to your CAD software, you can do that too. It may not be a requirement. And if you don't get this right, you're going to end up with creating more data silos, more problems. But this is something that is very achievable nowadays. It's a lot easier to build these sorts of integrations. It might be a little bit more difficult if your company is working on a locally hosted ERP system that has a local database, especially if it's an older system. You might need to do like ODBC data requests and push information in using computer use tools rather than direct API connections, which are much easier if you're working on a cloud ERP. But don't change your ERP system just to improve your quoting process. We'll be covering a lot more related to ERP rip-outs and ERP transformations using AI in future videos. And finally, the measurement and continuous improvement of a system like this is really important. You want to be able to get a MVP, like a minimum viable product of your CPQ or your RFQ system up as soon as possible. But how do you know if that system is working, and how do you continue to improve it over time? Well, you want to be tracking your cycle time, so your time to quote. You want to be tracking your win rate, your accuracy of quotes, and your margin. And by accuracy of quote, I mean, is that quote actually something that's buildable? Is that quote actually accurate to what the customer requested? And the margin performance of, are you actually making money at the end of the day? Are you being able to track your gross margin, your gross profit effectively? And while you're tracking these, you want to be creating dashboards so you can track it. Your dashboard should already be available within your RFQ system. You can use this data to continuously improve these processes over time, looking at win rate, looking at cycle time, looking at accuracy, and looking at your cost and your margin performance. You'll be able to understand what are the patterns between quotes that win and quotes that lose. So as I said, this is the first introduction to this series where we're going to be covering all of these in way more detail. If you haven't subscribed already, just drop a subscribe below. I'll be posting all of this stuff for free. But if you do need help to understand how this would work for yourselves, we can do a free discovery call with your team so we can help you to understand where are the opportunities in your company. And if you want to do that yourself then and you want to implement that yourself, that is completely fine. Do bear in mind that we do have limited availability in our calendar, but there is a link in the description where you'll be able to see that. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you learned something. And if you do have any more questions about what we covered here, feel free to drop them in the comments down below. Thank you, and I'll see you next time.